for what I'm hoping we think will be a very exciting discussion about Minneapolis brutalism. Just as a quick introduction, my name is Rebecca Kaufman, and I'm a board member with Preserve Minneapolis, and I sit on the advocacy, communications, and events committees. So for better or worse, here I am today. I'd like to introduce my co-host today. We've got Jen Pillar-Quaid. Jen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I am chair of the events committee and also on the board with Rebecca of Preserve Minneapolis. I will be, there are few housekeeping items. I'll be monitoring the chat as well. So this discussion is going to be recorded, so please keep your microphones off or muted at least, and you can turn your videos off if you choose. We will be doing questions and answers at the end, and please use the chat function to type in your questions, and then I will be monitoring that and we can do the Q&A at the end. And that will be it for now. Go ahead, Rebecca.
All right. So just a little bit about Preserve Minneapolis. We are a cultural heritage organization in the city of Minneapolis that was founded 2009 roughly. And basically we're a grassroots effort that started with just a group of people who really cared about historic preservation in our city. And so you can see from our mission that our goal is just engaging the public in different ways. Kind of our primary thing is through a walking tour season, and then we try to do events here and there about things that kind of seem to be buzzing in our city or conversations that have been stirring. And so that's where today's talk came from. And so why brutalism? All the reasons, right? It's a controversial form of architecture. It's one of those things that, you know, some people think is really dehumanizing, can throw out words like oppressive, often makes the world's ugliest building list, things like that. And then you have kind of people, true modernists, who say, but it comes from Corbusier, and you have concrete and material and simplicity and identity and dystopian theory, and it's all in there. So what a great thing to kind of rally around and talk about, or box around, however you want to think of it. And so these are just some kind of classic examples. One actually quite recently that was very carefully restored, PV Plaza, that are around our city. And kind of the center point building that brought us together today is this building called the Knutson Company Building. And I think the first controversial thing around this building is if you consider it brutalism or not, or is this just modernism and precast concrete? You know, one conversation we could already be having. But it recently came up in conversation with our Heritage Preservation Commission, and there were lots of opinions on all sides that ultimately led to a demolition decision. And so I think we are here to kind of rally opinions, bring some expert voices into what leads to a significance in modernism within Minneapolis. If that's a brutalist structure, is that something like this, or maybe we have a different form of identity here that we would cling to when we're kind of considering this type of architecture. So that's enough from me for now. I'm going to introduce our wonderful panelists today. So we have, first up, Richard Cronick. So he's a full-time freelance writer since 1985 who's been specializing in architecture and engineering, including a book on prefurbia, one of my favorite titles, Reinventing the Suburbs from Disdainables to Sustainable. He's also the editor-in-chief of Minneapolis Historical, which is Preserve Minneapolis's online guide to historic architecture in Minneapolis. He's written more than 100 articles on architecture and engineering, organized more than 60 architecture tours, and is also a professional musician, which if you joined us just a few minutes early, you got to hear about his upcoming gig in a maybe post-COVID world, which is very exciting. So thank you for joining us, Dick. We're also joined by Todd Grover. Todd is a principal at McDonald and Mack Architects in Minneapolis, Minnesota. In 2011, the American Institute of Architects gave McDonald and Mack the Firm of the Year award, stating that they were the gold standard in historic preservation. Todd's work includes numerous regional projects at significant historic sites, including the Alexander Ramsey House interior restoration, the restoration of 40+ historic roadside sites for MnDOT, Scott and Nolte Hall renovations at the University of Minnesota, and Ralph Rapson's Arvon Fraser Library. Todd is influential in modernist preservation, where he's currently a director of the U.S. Board of Docomomo, serving as executive committee secretary and chair of the advocacy committee. Todd is also an adjunct assistant professor at the University of Minnesota, where he teaches material conservation and team teaches a senior design studio focusing on the interweaving of historic preservation and design. He holds a BA and Master of Architecture from the University of Minnesota and a Master of Science in Historic Preservation from the University of Oregon. Our third guest this evening is Bob Roscoe, who also serves in our events committee at Preserve Minneapolis, I should mention. He has over 4 decades of architectural work as a principal of design for preservation. Significant work includes design for building renovation, historic preservation in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Duluth, a small town in South Dakota that will go unnamed, and a Wisconsin town along the Mississippi River. He's also partnered with architect Karen Gearstand and has won several Preservation Excellence Awards. He's also served on Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission for 21 years, including as chair of the commission for part of that time. He has education at the University of Minnesota, including a Bachelor of Arts degree in art history and 5 years in the School of Architecture. So thank you, Bob, for joining us. And is also the author of 2 published books relating to historic architecture. Finally, our 4th panelist will be Bill Lindiky. Bill is a PhD and an urban geographer and writer who focuses on how environments shape our lives. He's taught at the University of Minnesota and Metro State University and blogs at Twin City Sidewalks and Street of Men, in addition to, I'm sure, lots of other writing and things. So thank you to our 4 guests. We're excited to hear your perspectives on these sides. So with that, I'm going to pose what we kind of loosely threw 2 questions at our panelists to consider in advance of today's conversation. I've told them they have free reign to kind of respond how they choose. But the first question we were thinking here, as we're talking about concrete structures and brutalism, we asked them to consider what are other examples of modernism within Minneapolis, and would you consider this building, this kind of controversial Knutson building, to be of a similar caliber? Or did they consider it to be a building worthy of redevelopment? Because that seemed to be really kind of the crux of our conversation. And so what are your thoughts on the raising of this building, and where do you stand kind of in the broader conversation? So with that, I will turn it over to Dick.
Thanks, Rebecca. Edna Brazaitis, a member of our Preserve Minneapolis Board of Directors, recently sent me an article from the Washington Post entitled, "Brutalism Buildings Aren't Unlovable, You're Looking at Them Wrong." The writer, Kelsey Abels, says, quote, "Brutalist buildings maintain one unflinching constant, a sense of permanence," end quote. And while that's true, I think it's a rather weak argument because the same result can also be achieved with many other materials besides concrete. She goes on to say, quote, "To appreciate brutalist architecture is to embrace the essence of things," end quote. Frankly, I think she's missing what people want from architecture. All brutalist buildings are not the same quality. People love some brutalist structures. For example, Le Corbusier's chapel at Ronchamp. And as Abels points out in her article, they also love the arched coffered ceilings and walls of Washington, D.C.'s Metro. But people enjoy those structures not because of their apparent permanence or because they express some essence, but because they inspire spiritual, or if you prefer, psychological thoughts in our minds. In contrast, most brutalist buildings, such as the Knutson Company building, are examples, in my view, of an emperor wearing no clothes. Modernism was originally based on the idea that all architectural ornament must be rejected, as expressed in Adolf Loos's 1908 essay entitled "Ornament as Crime." Next slide there. Yeah, there we go. And also in Le Corbusier's statement that a house should be a machine for living in. With all ornament considered anathema Modernism throws Vitruvius's famous triad, firmitas, utilitas, venustas, out of proportion. By rejecting venustas, that is physical beauty, modernism has no choice but to focus all of its design energy on the other two, firmitas, structural strength, and utilitas, functionality. The result, sadly, is often an ugly building that inspires nothing in the hearts and minds of humans. I think it's important to point out that modernist doctrine was strongly influenced by atheistic socialism, thus in part a rejection of spirituality. And that brings me to my main point. Whether you call it spirituality or psychology, what humans are hungry for in architecture is buildings that elicit an emotional response. And that, I think, is exactly what's missing in a lot of brutalism. Louis Sullivan got it right when he said, quote, "I value spiritual results only. I say spiritual results precede all other results and indicate them. I can see no efficient way of handling the relationship between ornament and structure on any other than a spiritual or psychic basis," end quote. Sullivan and his followers, George Elmsley, Frank Lloyd Wright, and others got it right when they designed with a goal of connecting humans to nature, an idea that I think is more important today than ever. Because that was their goal, they chose forms of nature, mostly plant life, as the basis of their ornament. Organic architecture, not brutalism, is what the people are hungry for.
Thank you for that, Dick. I am sure Todd will have some thoughts, so I'm going to welcome him to speak next.
Thank you. Well, a couple things. One is it's hard to follow Dick. Dick that was a great introduction, but I would have to slightly differ from his opinion. And maybe we can get into that in a little bit. But one of the things that I'm involved in and that I'm involved in sometimes on a daily basis that was talked about or talked about as part of my introduction is the work that I do as part of Docomomo. So Docomomo is an organization that talks about the documentation, conservation of works, sites, buildings, neighborhoods of the modern movement. And as part of my work there, I am on the advocacy committee for the national chapter. This is actually an international organization that the U.S. is a chapter of, and that we actually also have a chapter in Minnesota. And what I have on my first slide is a number of different advocacy projects that we've been working on over the past year. Some are very regional. Some are very have a larger impact, a national impact. But what I think is very interesting about all of the sites that this is a variety of ones that are working on here. You can see that there are a number of projects that have brutalism as a part of it. And you can see, so for instance, down in the lower left, you see the Hirshhorn Sculpture Gardens and the Hirshhorn Museum as part of one of the things we're looking at. We're also looking at things like postmodernism, topic for another conversation. That is Horton Plaza in San Diego. But another one that we're looking at is the Weyerhaeuser complex out in Seattle. Next slide, please. One of the things that what this is really talking to us about and what we're looking at even from a local standpoint is there are a lot of these buildings and sites that I think we just don't know enough about yet. These are ones that we've run across recently in the past couple of years in Minnesota. Obviously, PV Plaza, we've already talked about PV Plaza, a great project that happened both from an advocacy level, but also from a design level. But all the rest of them are projects that I don't think we've quite understood what the design importance of some of these projects are. Middle one top is the Southdale Library. The one on the right is the Sons of Norway building that was recently demolished. Two flanking ones on the bottom are Public Service Center and the City of Lakes building. But there's also even a project that we're looking at in Blue Mountain State Park, the Manfred Author's House there. Why I wanted to talk about this is, and related to the Knutson building, is I don't think we know enough about these buildings, and I don't think we know enough about the design intention that goes behind them, that I think may answer some of what Dick was talking about. Is what is that design motive? What is that design intent? Rather than maybe some of the aesthetics that do play a part into our conversations. But I think there also is this understanding of what went into these buildings in order to better understand the deeper meaning of that. And I would extend that to the Knutson building. One of the things that we did as part of Docomomo was write a letter saying, we just don't know enough about this building. Is it something that is important? We just don't know yet. And so I'll end there so we can move on to the next, but I'll end there as part of this idea of understanding what we're looking at before we lose some of these buildings.
Thank you for that. I think in our theme of rebuttal to rebuttal, I'm going to next welcome Bob Roscoe.
I don't have anything to rebut here, I don't think. My first comment is that because so-called brutalism is so new, there's a couple of factors. One is that sometimes with architects like Frank Lloyd Wright and others, it took the public a long time to warm up to it. And I think eventually that situation is going to happen with brutalism. And I think the Washington building, I like that the way it is. I think it has a certain gracefulness. It's more of a graceful looking building than it is that it's raw concrete is trying to assert itself. The other thing is that in line with that, take the word impressionism in art. It was meant to be derogatory, just as Gothic was meant to be a derogatory term. And it turns out to be that Gothic architecture is some of the most sophisticated and delicate architecture that we have. So I think it's going to take the public a while, including architects, perhaps, to, I'll use the word warm up to it, because they don't seem warm, some of these buildings. But I think in time that they really will. I think that's all. That's the end of my comments here. For now.
All right. So we have 2 votes for give it time, is what I'm hearing.
Right.
All right. I think we'll move on now to Bill.
Oh, great. Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, this is a wonderful conversation, and I'm admittedly not an architect. I have a background in urban geography, so I'm kind of at this from a little bit of a different angle. I think the reason I was invited on here today was because I wrote a column for Cityscape in MinPost, which is I've been writing for many years now, called "No, Minneapolis Should Not Preserve the Car-Centric 21 North Washington Building." So it's kind of I don't know. That's my take on that was. A building that I didn't really ever like very much, and then learned about the historic preservation debate about it. In general, brutalism is something like most people, have mixed feelings about. It can be good, it can be bad. It's like a subset of modernist architecture in general, which has, there's a lot of great examples and a lot of ones that I don't really like. I put on the screen 2 examples of, I think, Twin Cities brutalism that I like both of these buildings. One's in St. Paul and Snelling Avenue, the Lutheran church. That's sort of, it sort of needs a lot of attention right now. I think it's in disrepair. That photo is flattering compared to how it looks right now, I think. And then another one that's often sort of scorned by University of Minnesota students, the Chateau Student Housing Co-op, sort of the classic tower. But it's not a tower in a park, and that's sort of important. I don't know, Le Corbusier idea of having a tower surrounded by open green space. That's sort of one of the problems that I have with a lot of modernism or brutalism, is that too often it's what I would consider anti-urban. The idea that you need to have big empty spaces and the walls along the sidewalks are almost always blank, having no windows or even connection to the public space around it. So when I'm thinking about whether or not you should preserve or not preserve a building like the Washington Avenue building or these two, you might consider things like the setting. How does it connect to the buildings around it? And then location, and then what sort of alternative uses are being proposed for the site? Are they going to tear it down for a parking lot or for what? So that's some of the things I consider. That's not necessarily about the aesthetics of the building from a architectural perspective. There's certainly a lot more we could talk about. I was intrigued by Todd mentioning Horton Plaza in San Diego. That's an interesting thought experiment for if that's a building that should be reused or not. Certainly a failed urban mall at this point, but it's also intriguing. So thinking about like, how do we tackle modernism in general, especially modernism that has, I think, some really deep flaws, like a lot of the buildings that were built after the 60s that are just, I think, really problematic in downtowns especially. So I guess the point is that a lot depends on location. And the Washington Avenue example to me is a critical downtown location at Main Street, Hennepin in Washington, that should be, or First in Washington, that should be just a place where you have a really magnificent building that does a lot of work to help tie the public space in the city together. And I always hated the existing Knutson building because of its sort of anti-urban qualities. So that, I guess that's all I'll say right now, but certainly we could talk more about any of these things.
Thank you. Just thinking, I have a question that I prepared, and then I have questions based on what you just said. So we'll see how much of this all gets woven together. But I mean, I think something that nobody brought up yet that I kind of thought somebody would touch on is that this isn't a building isolated, actually, right? It's part of a wider development that has a context in that part of Minneapolis. And so whether we feel it's divorced from that context or not, actually probably has a lot to do with our understanding of the building as an isolated tower, or if it's kind of urban infrastructure, it is wider and could be considered within that, within some infill with kind of newer development in between. So that is not the question you have prepared to answer. But yes, please.
Rebecca, were you talking about the Knutson building connection to the Gateway District? Okay. Yeah. And I think that's an intriguing component, just because the report that was written by Landscape Research as a part of the HPC application that the client had done had a lot of really interesting historic components in it. And I'm not going to kind of beat this idea too much, but I think there was an additional trying to understand how the Gateway District related to this building and how the significance of the Gateway District really relates, and what is that significance within downtown Minneapolis? Because there was, and to what Bill was saying, there really was a car-centric attitude towards this. And it was because in the 1960s, we had everybody moving out, and we had everybody all the big developments. We had General Mills that was moving out. They moved out to the west side of the city. And what they were trying to do was bring people back in. I even think of one of my favorite buildings downtown, the Farmers and Mechanics Bank downtown Minneapolis. They actually had a drive-through built into their building when they added the addition. You would drive, from what I understand, you would drive in and then you would go to the teller, and then I think you would actually turn around in a turntable and drive back out. And that was because it really was this response to the culture at that time. And so, yes, while we may think the car culture may not be a great thing to dwell on now, it really was an essence of what the urban development was happening at that time. And so, is that something to preserve? Is there a way to, I would maybe turn it around and say, is there a way to reuse that to keep that sense there, but also to develop that in a useful and a creative way?
I think that's really, oh, go ahead, Dick, please.
I'm interested in knowing what you like about the F&M building.
The Farmers and Mechanics Bank?
Yep.
What isn't there to like about it? I like the, we don't have a picture of it. Hopefully people know what we're talking about downtown. I like the spatial volume of the inside. I like a lot of the architectural kind of massing of it, and then also the comparison of what they did with the 1960s curtain wall structure that they developed behind it. And there was this really interesting framing that was there from the original building and the addition, and how those two things work together. There's a number of things. I love the original detailing of the original building, but I love the blue clad curtain wall structure of their kind of renovation that they did, because they were a bank that didn't have any branches. Their founding charter wouldn't have any branches like banks typically did. So that was the bank that they had to do. So they had to work with something downtown.
I'm thinking I might jump off from that and kind of introduce our second question, but then we can certainly
Sure.
circle back to some of these themes. But kind of relatedly, as we're talking about context, we're talking about kind of identity of the building. In reading through some of the reports, I noticed the issue of intactness and identity and originality comes up a lot with buildings like this, where, has it been modified too much? Has too much of the context changed around it, that it's lost its significance, its meaning? Obviously, the introduction of windows seems like it was a particular concern, because it did modify so much of the original precast concrete facade. And so I think the question I posed to you is a question of sustainability, but sustainability kind of more holistically concerned than just embodied carbon, though I think that's certainly a good question. And I think, Todd, you were alluding to with your discussion of reuse, is there a way we can reintroduce life into car-centric architecture? And I think we all know just scarcity of concrete and the issues involved with that, how that would be a fundamental concern. But then also, this idea of, how much can we fundamentally change what a neighborhood is? I know the introduction of Central Library was kind of a big shift for the area, though I personally love that library with my little kid and I take him in there. But in terms of neighborhood identity, how's it shifting? How's it changing? And what does that mean for kind of the sustainability or reuse of a building like this? So I think, Dick, you're supposed to be first, but I'll let you decide.
Well, I've already expressed my disdain for this building. So I'm not, I won't shed any tears if it's torn down. And I'm not too worried about whether, because of what I've just said, I'm not worried about any changes that have been made to it. I think it's not a wonderful building.
It'll be the takeaway. It's not a wonderful building. Okay. Anyone else? Todd?
I really like the Knudsen building. I think it certainly has the right kind of scale for the buildings around it. And I think that that's really important. And I think that the way that it's been remodeled to allow more glass in it, I think it almost has a delicacy to it. And I don't think it's a brutalist building at all.
I will note, in reading the reports, people used modernism and brutalism almost interchangeably,
Right.
without really defining why they were alluding to those elements. And that's why I said, is it modernism and precast concrete, or is it brutalism? And I have a running theory. It's just when you don't like it, you start saying it has brutalist elements, but that's my own aside. Todd, Bill, any thoughts?
The well, a couple things. One is when we there are a number of things, but the first thing that I'll say, and I just actually did a presentation for the AIA, and talking in there, they have a series going on about sustainability and talking about the theme of it's called Material Matters, and I talked to I kind of presented this idea that I think as we move forward in our world of sustainability, and having that as more of a focus, we have these existing buildings that I really think we need to reimagine how we are looking at them, and kind of brings up two things to me. A little bit of what Bill had said before, about what goes there, what is the site and what goes there, and I think a little bit of that we can make some of that judgment or comparison. But one of the things that I would be concerned about is is this the last site that was in Minneapolis that we need to build on and build new and better and build in a new sustainable way? It's not. So then it really comes to my mind is, could this building, it has embodied energy, embodied carbon, but it also has which is significant, but it also has a structure system. It has a capacity to be something new and to renovate it. And I would say, I would say go down the block a little bit more. And even just today, I saw an article about the old warehouse building where that's going to be renovated. It was, now I just forgot the theater that was there in the basement of it. But there's nothing architecturally significant about it. It's part of the warehouse district, and I would say that building and this building have an equal, where that building is going to be reused for apartments and is going to be renovated and is going to be kept. It's going to use tax credits as a part of it. That's part of the warehouse district, and that building isn't the prime example or the most ornamental example of what's in the warehouse district, but it's a good building that's being reused. This one, looking at the Gateway District, maybe it doesn't have the highest component of what the Gateway District is, the Yamasaki building or some of the other buildings, but it's a good building that's a part of that district that could be reused, that could have all of this energy that's already there redone. And what creative ways could we create apartments or other things that's a part of this building, and also accentuate some of the significant components of this building, the precast. Maybe there was something. There was talk about how early this was in downtown Minneapolis. I think there's something there, and it just relates to being a little bit more creative in trying to understand what that is in the bigger realm, and also be sustainable then in that as part of that outcome.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, because yeah, I think you're right. The engineering components in terms of the structural precast concrete isn't lifted out as often as the aesthetics and the changes, which anyway, it's an interesting aside. Sorry, Bill, did you have anything to add?
Sure. I probably should have not. When I said earlier that I always hated this building, it wasn't necessarily that I hate the building per se. It's like, actually, I kind of like what they did. I appreciate what Bob and what Todd are both saying about this building. It's not that bad. The windows added a lot to it. I mean, I think compared to some fenestration projects like in the Dayton's in downtown St. Paul, this is actually pretty tasteful and thoughtful. And so the problem I have with this building is where it's located. and not necessarily what it looks like or how it works as a building in a vacuum, right? If this was located on Central Avenue in Northeast or someplace like in a commercial corridor, I think it'd be great. And I would love to reuse it and preserve it and change some things and add maybe some first floor space in a creative way. But this is actually, I think, should be in the center of downtown. And I hate it because of where it is and also what it represents. The Gateway project, the Urban Renewal project, to me is one of the biggest tragedies in Minneapolis history. I think it was trying to turn the core of downtown into what amounts to a suburban office park designed around commuters, and taking all of the things that I love about a downtown, its public space and its like diversity and the fact that so many people feel welcome there, and getting rid of those things. And so to me, it's like it's got a particularly odious quality once I learned about the fact that this was the contractor company that did those demolitions. So I don't know, that's sort of another conversation about Minneapolis history. As far as like when it comes to thinking about like what do we do about preserving buildings in general, I think one question I always think about is, is it surrounded by a surface parking lot? Is a question that comes up a lot. I've seen a number of projects recently in St. Paul and Minneapolis where redevelopments have occurred where they take the parking lot around the building and build around it and keep the original structure. And I love seeing that. I wish we could do that more. I think this case the parking is underneath the building, so it's sort of impossible. I don't know. I feel like looking at a case like this, I would think about the location very fundamentally, and for me, this is not a good place for this particular building. So,
I think Todd's point about the energy and carbon that's in the building is very important, and if it can be renovated and made into a new use that serves the area, more power. I think that will be a very good solution to the problem.
Can I just add in though? But I think the question about why this is important to be in the downtown. So the project what was going to go in here was a 26-story housing development. So I don't know how many people that is, how many units that would have been. I think it's still going forward, that project. Am I wrong about that? So having hundreds and hundreds of people live in downtown where you can walk across the street to a grocery store and hopefully walk to work, that to me is the carbon footprint that we should be thinking about.
And I would agree with that we should be thinking in broader terms and making sure we're looking at the carbon footprint. But again, like I said, there are other sites within a couple blocks of this that we could build that new 26-story building. That it just was this site was the focus of it, and that's why I would urge the developers, people thinking about this, it may not be the most pristine or first the kind of the, I guess, low hanging fruit sites, but can we find sites that still work, that are empty, that we can infill and have that density and that growth there, and then also retain things like buildings like this and reuse them. I think really one of the things, especially as a preservationist, we need to understand we have kind of different levels of buildings. We have first level buildings, second level buildings, and third level buildings. This one's kind of between second and third level. Well, I would only say between second and third level because I would love to have known more about the design of this building from the Knudsen Company, where kind of this originated from. It seems like a very interesting, unique building that I don't think would have typically just come easily out of a contracting office. And so I think there's some influence that was there. But I think talking back to that kind of for second and third level buildings, those third level buildings are ones that I think can take on a really, really distinct, different flavor while keeping a lot of the building, keeping the carbon footprint that the building has already created and reusing that and adding to that and being more free within the design of that. We have a lot of third level buildings, and those are the ones that I think we can be have some of that creativity added to. Second and first level, yeah, we need to be a little bit more sensitive, but I think this one is one that fits within there. That maybe there could have been a little bit more creativity added to the reuse of this building and still keep that footprint, but also talk, Bill, about some of the things that you're doing and creating some better density and other things there to help with that long-term carbon footprint.
I really appreciate your point about creativity, because I think you're right. This ground level activation of car-centric architecture is not going to go away. It's something in our urban fabric we're going to come up against. So every time it comes up, it'll be a unique and creative solution to how that might be reactivated or repurposed. And yeah, density, that's a whole other question.
And I would love to see I would love to see that happen without kind of the mixed use that we have right now on our first level downtown, because we just, a lot of the developments that are happening, we have a first level mixed use space, but unfortunately a lot of those spaces aren't filled. They're just, and even in this neighborhood, they're just, those first floor spaces are just empty. And so maybe this could have been something to reimagine how that gets used.
Yeah, mixed use is a good coverall, right?
I'd like to go back and defend the building a little bit more. I really think it's a beautiful building, and I don't think it's brutalist. It doesn't have that kind of characteristic. It doesn't really show the raw concrete aspect of it at all. I think it almost has a delicacy to it, and I think there's an interesting rhythm, floor by floor, that gives it an interesting facade to people who walk by, drive by.
Yeah, and that's really why I was hoping that we could have gone with the designation study for the building as part of the HPC. That's what they had approved. Because I agree with you, Bob. I think there's a deeper story here that just hasn't been known yet. I don't know why. There's nothing that I can't point to anything, but it's just kind of a gut reaction, similar to what you're saying. There's a delicacy. There's an intentionality behind some of this design that I think I would love to have known more about what that is before making the determination to tear it down.
And interesting, I think what really helps the building is that the pilotis, how it raises up from the site. I think that's really interesting. It really is a nice characteristic for the building. And in the future, if the cars get removed, they can glass in those areas for ground floor commercial.
Yeah.
I appreciate your point very much so, Bob, because you're right. And in the HPC report, that was something that came up, was just this very intentional patterning of the precast concrete. And I do think, yeah, that's something that could be brought forward for history books. How's that at this stage? Jen, I was going to check in with you and see if we had any questions, because I think I'm realizing we're at about 15
Yes, we are doing well on time. Yes, we are taking questions now. So if everybody wants to type them in the chat or use the raising hand function at the bottom of your screen under the reactions. And I don't know, Rebecca, if you want to stop screen sharing, so then maybe you see the hands raised easier. If there are any, or you just want to leave it up. Okay.
Yeah, but maybe if you want to call in people.
Yeah. All right. Give people a moment to write anything in the chat, or if you have any. Just trying to show all the images here. Does anyone have a question there? They can unmute themselves and also ask the question if that is easier for everyone. We have one in the chat. I like this building. It offers contrast, and I agree with the comment about its delicacy. Knutson building, I agree wholeheartedly with Bob Roscoe.
Bob's the winner.
We've got comments.
Yeah, the question of if it's brutalism or if it's concrete modernism, actually came up in our first social media post. I think it was the first
Concrete
comment. Somebody
modernism.
was like, "This is not brutalism." And
No, it isn't.
and I was like, "We are not Instagram comment fighting about this." I didn't call it that, so it's just how it's been termed, right? So maybe that does go back to my kind of unjust statement of what do we determine? If we like it, it's international style because then it's Corbusier, and if it's brutalism, then we can just forget that he's the one that maybe brought up Béton Brut, right? Like, so, yeah.
Yes. Well, another question too, just thoughts on concretes as heritage, what means for the urban movement and racial, social inequity, things of that sort. So back to kind of usage, but also the bigger meaning behind.
Yeah, I think you brought that up a bit, Bill, but in terms of just kind of the gateway development in general and its urban renewal plans and things like that. Anyone have more thoughts around that?
I just have a thought about how this is going to keep being a question. The work that Todd and Docomomo I hope I got that right, is doing is, I think, really great to sort of raise awareness of, you know, buildings, post-war buildings that are, you know, probably in danger of being destroyed. But downtown St. Paul, there are a number of examples of sort of 60s architecture that is in various states of, I guess, people wondering about their future, right? And it's just a good conversation. The sooner we can start talking about it, and whether remodeling or whether buildings are savable or not, or what. And the degree of honor building is one in downtown St. Paul that I was thinking of, is currently being rehabbed as housing. But that building could use some modifications, but they would ruin its architectural integrity. And so there's these debates that I think we should definitely be talking about.
We do have a question in the chat. Thank you, Bill. We look at mid-century urban renewal project now, 70 years. Oops, another question, sorry. There we go. 70 years later with regretful 2020 hindsight. Will we have the same regret in the coming years after this building comes down, especially if this sets a precedent for tearing down buildings from that era? Also, why couldn't this building be repurposed with additional stories being added to it? So that is one question. Or, yeah.
Yeah, I think the last couple of questions are related, but it's coming down to this idea of how are we justifying reuse against heritage value, I think, is how I'm reading all three of these. Because, you know, when we have these kind of questionable attributes or attributes that seem to be questioned, you know, how do we still argue the reuse of the building versus its demolition? I think is another, kind of important thing.
Yes, and how do we encourage and elevate reuse of third-tier buildings without having to justify and that they're historically significant? And then another question, do our panelists, okay, so the majority of brutalist buildings in Minneapolis are less than 50 years old. Do our panel participants have any opinions as to what exceptionally important attributes would merit preservation of such young buildings before scholarly research helps us better understand this movement?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah. I see that John Smoley wrote that. Thanks, John. John would be one to ask that.
Thank you, John.
What's that? That's his job. That's right.
Yeah.
What are the attributes? I mean, it really, what I would say is we need to, while we're waiting for that scholarly research, we just need to, I think, be patient, but also understand that there are going to be elements for each building that come up that I think are going to expand what we understand as a brutalist style, even a more regional brutalist style, just because it's going to be very different from every other place. And Boston City Hall came up in the chat. We have some major designers that worked on the East Coast and the West Coast, and like a lot of our buildings, a lot of what got brought to our area may not necessarily be able to rival with those, but they are important buildings for us because they're regionally important. And so I think it is maybe looking at some of what these other communities are looking at. So on one of my slides was the Hurley building, and it was part of the Boston City Hall complex. So you're going to go back there. Thanks. So yeah, go. So upper, I'm pointing with my cursor, but you can't see it. Upper row, the second from the left, is the Hurley building. Very brutalist building. I don't think there's anybody who would disagree with that. But the interesting thing is what the city of Boston is doing there is they're taking a long look at this building because they realize there could be some significance here. And so what they did before going in and looking at the renovation of that is to open it up to have some public sessions to try to figure out what is significant about this building, involving the public in this, talking through this, looking at some, yes, scholarly research is going to help us, but trying to look at what some of the essences of this building were and are, and trying to be a little bit more thoughtful on how we go about to reuse the building, because it does need to be reused. There's parts of that building that need to be fixed, but how can we do that in a more thoughtful manner? And so I think looking to other places that are trying to struggle with this might be one way that we can then turn around and reflect it upon us and try to understand what we have here and what might be important here.
I think one of the attributes, the question was, what are the attributes that we should be looking at to decide whether a building is great and whether it should be saved? And this is based on my opening comment. I think an important attribute is delight. And I would point to PV Plaza as a wonderful example of brutalism that has delight, that delights people. And it's its creativity, it's the depth, the levels. It's fascinating just to look at, and more so to be in.
Yeah.
Great comment, yes.
And whereas I think the Knutson Company building, it makes me think of Barcode. And that's so dry. And mathematical, and it looks to me like it was designed with a T-square and triangle. It's all 45, it's all 90-degree angles.
Most buildings are.
Yes, but PV Plaza is not.
No.
And so that, and it's a very intangible idea that I'm throwing out. I don't know how there's no formula for achieving delight, but PV Plaza does that. And I think that's an important idea to throw into the mix.
A comment I have, I've done I give tours in warm months of Rice Park in St. Paul. I just really love Rice Park. But Rice Park is to St. Paul as PV is to Minneapolis.
Well, except that Rice is the first park, well, second after Irvine, actually.
Right.
You're almost simultaneous. So it has that historical character that PV will have in 100 years.
Right.
I think we'll close with this last question. I see Bill answered in the chat, but maybe it's something we can open up if you're all right with that, Bill. But somebody asked the question, do you think there's space for anti-urban movements in these dense urban environments? So thinking of the Yamasaki building, which has been brought up a couple of times, where the design element is clear. So is it still an urban space, or is it still kind of worthy of the space it's taking up in an urban environment? Bill, I see your response said probably not. It has some kind of anti-human qualities in terms of activation, though it is a beautiful building. Anything you want to add to that?
It's very beautiful, but I think what I would like to do there is reclaim the public space that it occupies. So the Nicollet Avenue right away and the Gateway Park like footprint is like overlaps with that building. And if you want to give a tour of the historic Gateway District, you will get kicked off of that foyer. I've done this, so I know, by the security guards who patrol then it was the ING building. I forget what company are they still the owners? Point is, it should be public space, and it's not. And my problem with it is not necessarily that it should be removed, but I think we could do a lot to improve its centrality for our city and the way that people can interact with it. But it's hard to reconcile that with like private property rights and the insurance company and the owners of the building. So I think it's sort of problematic, I guess.
Anyone else have thoughts about that? No, you just walk by and take a picture like this, like I do every time I walk by. I mean, it's beautiful, but yeah.
Something that came to my mind a little while ago, and then I've thought about it since, and that's parking ramps. They're basically concrete structures. And in most cases, the designers, architects of them, try to make them take away the concrete aspect of it. They kind of add something else. So you're not saying, there's a concrete parking ramp. Sometimes it does show, but there seems to be an attempt with parking ramps to kind of take away the concrete aspect of them, of the character that they really are.
I'll just kind of fill in a little bit too, what Bill said about the landscape too. You know, this slide actually represents it really well. These are the things that we're having some difficulty in better understanding, and knowing what the impacts are, knowing how to go in and properly, either if they're higher tier buildings, do a sensitive renovation or restoration of them, but the lower tier buildings, how to be what kind of level of renovations can happen in there. You know, all of these, and especially the three on the bottom, the Brutalist Hirshhorn, the postmodern Horton Plaza, and the landscape as a part of the Weyerhaeuser complex. These are three major pieces within our modern architecture heritage that we're just beginning to scratch the surface on, understanding what the significance of these types of buildings are. And while I would love to be able to immediately say that what's like extremely important and what are the pieces out of here that we need to save, because this is the essence of what each of these buildings are. Some of them are easy, some are going to be much more difficult. And I think, you know, getting back to this idea of trying to have a better understanding of what makes these important, and what makes these things really stand out. Mike Lovato in the comments said, how can we understand the third tier buildings unless we understand some of the historic significance of them? And I think, unfortunately, that's important. And unfortunately, I think we're losing pieces, or they're changing significantly without us being able to understand that a little bit more. And I don't have a good answer for how to slow that down. But I think that's one of the elements that we're really missing as a part of this broader component of that. And that's part of what Docomo was trying to do, is trying to become part of that education component of it.
Awesome. Thank you. And yes, so that concludes our questions. Yeah, I know we're a little over time, but thank you.
And I feel like Todd's remarks were a really nice summary. So thank you, Todd.
Yeah.
You did a good job of summarizing things. So I get to just take this the easy way out. No, thank you so much to all four of you for your thoughts and comments. I feel like it was a good discussion. I don't know that we have answers, but that's maybe okay sometimes. But definitely good discussion. if you want to continue thinking about brutalism, one of our board members, Gordon, put together this handout of examples, all things he's visited. He made sure to let us know, some of which he's worked on personally, of kind of brutalist structures around the world. I think it's kind of organized by typology, so you can pick some favorites and find that on the Preserve Minneapolis website. And then just a reminder, we have some upcoming events, including our summer walking tour season. And assuming we don't have any massive changes in COVID, we do plan to have some in-person tours this year, which we're very excited about after having to do completely virtual last year. And so, yeah, we hope you will stay connected with us either through that. We'll have an upcoming virtual trivia night next month, and we're planning some fall events now. So if you enjoyed a discussion like tonight and you have ideas for maybe what a future discussion could be, please do be in touch with Jen or myself, because we would love to keep engaged in conversations what's happening like this. So thank you again to everyone.
Jen and Rebecca, thank you very much. You organized this really well, and it just provided a nice structure for us to make our comments on it and observations. So thank you very much. Well organized.
Thank you, Bob.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you all the panelists and everyone for attending as well. A lot of thank yous in the chat as well. So great job, panel. John Smalley did say, thank you, panel. Your topic was brutal, but you made it quite interesting, which I thought was like, so
Everybody.
excellent. Have a wonderful
Thank
evening.
you.
Thank you.
Okay.